Shalom and Maranatha. Welcome to the Septuagint versus the Masoretic channel. This is the only ministry in the world that looks at the truth of the Bible, taking the Septuagint, the Bible of Jesus Christ and his disciples that came 300 years before he was born, and the Masoretic text, which is on the right-hand side of the screen, which came 300 years after Jesus Christ had already died and was not fully complete until 1,000 years. Some say 1,000 years later after his death. So today we're looking at Deuteronomy chapter 24, beginning in verse 1. We see our first difference. Dwell with her versus married her. Next, unbecoming thing in her versus uncleanness in her. So this is interesting. Unbecoming in the English means unfitting, inappropriate. It's not something that should be in a new wife. In the Masoretic, it expresses it as uncleanness, and that is perhaps very similar because you are looking for a wife, a bride, to be pure. In verse 2, she should go away, meaning if this happens, if she should go away, because of the if here, well, that's not really there, but that was inserted by the translators. So if this happens, or perhaps this is a suggestion that she should go away and be married to another man. However, in the Masoretic text, it says that she may go, so it is permitting her to go and marry another man. We know this is adultery according to the New Testament, and it's adultery here as well. In verse 4, defile the land, versus to cause the land to sin. So on one hand, it is your fault versus it is the land's fault. In verse 5, anything be laid upon him, talking about a new husband, newlywed husband, versus he be charged with any business. So you don't put something upon him that is going to distract him from starting his family with his new wife, essentially. I think that's how I read it anyway. In verse 6, it's talking about taking a pledge, or I should say the prohibition against taking a pledge, a millstone in this case, taking the under millstone or the upper millstone, because he who does so takes life for a pledge. What is a millstone? Well, we've heard the scriptures, read the scriptures. It's better for a millstone to be hung around somebody's neck who causes a young one in the faith to sin. But essentially a millstone was a very hard, very heavy tool that was used in ancient times. It was a common item, and it was so integral, according to this website, an integral part of society that Mosaic law forbade taking someone's millstone in a pledge. Now, what was this millstone for? It was used for grinding grain, which makes bread and sustains life. So if you take someone's millstone, you would, in effect, be taking away his or her life and the life of his family as well. When you do that. So that's what a millstone looks like. You can see how large this is. This is like a big round table. And then that's a lower millstone. And then you have the upper millstone. To get a bit of an idea of just how large this is, we have another picture. That's a donkey. And look how big the lower millstone is. It's almost as big as the donkey itself. And that upper millstone, it's about maybe a quarter or a third of the size of the donkey, but probably weighs as much, maybe even more. And these are solid, stone. So these are very heavy devices. But how can you take someone's millstone? You'd have to be very strong to take a millstone. The logistics of doing that is interesting. Okay, so next. Okay, I'm going to just finish this thought saying that, these were important tools in daily life in order to make bread, to feed oneself to eat. And without these, a person and his family could not feed themselves. Okay, in verse 7, we have an omission of a man who was caught stealing one of his brothers or sisters of the children of Israel, and having overcome him, so that part was omitted. So you do have to overcome that individual in order to sell them. You can't just sell them without having to force them. That means overpowering them. In verse 8, to yourself. Okay, to yourself. I'm looking for, it's in verse 8. Okay, take heed to yourself. So beware in regards to yourself, the plague of leprosy. So watch out for yourself. Watch your health. Not just take heed in a vague way, in a very nebulous way. Take heed. It's not being vague. It's being specific. Beware for yourself. Watch your own health. Watch how you behave. Watch how. Make sure you adhere to the law regarding leprosy. There's another omission in the same verse. It is according to all the law, not just according to what they teach you, according to the law of Yah, not the law of man. That's an important point to illustrate. Next is report. So as the Levites, the priests, shall report to you, versus what they teach you. Again, it's not their opinion. It's actually what they have been commanded to do, and how they've been commanded to judge as well. Next is do as I have charged you, talking to the individual in the Septuagint. In the Masoretic, as I commanded them, talking about the Levites and the priests, you shall observe to do. So what if they're not commanding you according to the Torah? Then you shouldn't obey them. So that is that allows an opportunity to make a mistake, this translation of the Masoretic. No, you have to do as Yah commands you, as God commands, not according to man, but according to God. In verse 9, in the way, which means in the journey, versus by the way, which means the same thing, but I want to clarify this because it can be confusing with our modern vernacular when you say, oh, by the way, meaning a PS, postscript, or I forgot to mention. No, this means in the journey. So by the journey, in the way of the journey, is what it really means. Verse 12, talking about if a man is poor, he shall not sleep with his pledge. And verse 13 goes into more specifics as to how you can sleep with somebody's pledge, as to what they owe you, or if they're lending you something in a form, this is their way to pay you temporarily, an IOU. So they're taking his outer garment. That's what they're doing. So that is my speculation, my opinion here, because it says in verse 13, you shall surely restore his pledge at sunset, and he shall sleep in his garment, and he shall bless you, and it shall be mercy to you. So it says mercy in the Septuagint. In the Masoretic, it says righteousness. So how can it be righteousness to you? Well, by obedience, it's righteousness. But however, when you look at the context, when you're showing mercy to one person, to your fellow brother or sister, then Yah himself will most likely show you mercy as well. Because if you forgive others their transgressions, you will also be forgiven. So if you show mercy, then likewise, mercy perhaps will be shown to you, or at least maybe more likely to be shown to you if you extend mercy to your brother, to your sister who you do see with your eyes. In verse 14, unjustly withhold the wages of the poor, versus you shall not oppress an hired servant that is poor. So oppression is somewhat vague again. In the Septuagint, it's describing exactly what is happening here. You have the hire, the paycheck essentially of the poor, the needy, or of the strangers is being withheld. It's being withheld, and they need that money in order to survive. So do not withhold the wages, and that happens in our modern day, even in 2021. Verse 15, the same day you shall pay him the wages. That seems to be when it is scheduled. Not perhaps it is every day. I'm not sure how it was in ancient times regarding when they were to be paid. I know in the parables it mentions, people getting paid after the work is done, and some people came later when, a lot of the work has been completed, but there is still work remaining, and they got paid the same amount. It seemed to be they were paid at the end of the day. So perhaps that's how it was done. I didn't do research into this, but that is an interesting topic. In the Masoretic, it says, at his day you shall give him his hire. So his day, it's a little vague as to what his day is. Maybe it's whenever he wants it. It's hard to say. In verse 15, we continue, and it says, because he is poor and he trusts in it, talking about the wages. So he trusts that you will give him the wages, and he needs that. So he trusts the wages will provide for him, because you need money, currency, to buy food, to buy supplies, necessities of life. In the Masoretic, it says he sets his heart upon it. Now that sounds a little covetous in my opinion. Verse 17, talking about judgment, you shall not wrest, meaning to seize or remove by force the judgment of the stranger, the fatherless and the widow. So you're not supposed to withhold them, not only their wages, but also judgment. You're going to give them the right judgment. You're going to judge righteously, regardless of whether they are poor, their class, their social status, or even their present marital arrangement. Versus pervert. So yeah, it's similar, but perverting it means you're still giving them judgment, and you're still doing that for them, but you are not necessarily removing judgment. You're just twisting it. You're perverting it. So one is worse than the other, I would say, the first one. Verse 19, it's talking about corn. When you've reaped corn, essentially it's barley. There's no such thing as corn in the Middle East in that time, in ancient times. Versus harvest. So your harvest, which is, again, vague, tends to be very vague in the Masoretic text. Verse 20, gather your olives versus beat your olive tree. So a lot of people, especially myself, I don't have an olive tree, so I don't know what that means when you beat your olive tree. Are you abusing it? No, it actually means gather your olives. So you're harvesting not only the barley, but also the olives as well. And next we're going to look at a reflection, just the reflection I've had on this law, particularly this chapter, and possibly even throughout the 5 books of Moses, the Torah, is these laws, when you think about it, and I meditated on it, is that they were meant to protect those, again, the fatherless, the widows, the poor, the stranger. These are, most of the time, they were people who were without fathers due to possibly death. Maybe they lost their men, their fathers, their husbands in warfare, and so now they're left to fend for themselves. But essentially, these are the heads of their household, and in a way, in a sense, they are somewhat powerless in that society until they can work and earn money and have land and so on. But when you are devoid of a man, in this case a husband, a strong man, somebody who's capable and competent, you are kind of at the mercy of society and the way that life works. You need either money or food or supplies. You need a man to do those things. So when you really reflect on these laws, it is such a wise and caring, loving law that is given by a loving God. So thank you very much for your time. That's all I have for you for this chapter of Deuteronomy 24. Please like and subscribe to this channel. We need all the support we can get to spread this truth about the Bible. A lot of people do not know that there's such thing as a Septuagint. Not only that, it was Jesus Christ's Bible, essentially, Yeshua HaMashiach. That's what he used, and his disciples did, and so did the early church. But it has been co-opted since 300 years after Jesus Christ, when Aquila of Sinope started to create his own translation. And here we are today. A lot of confusion and censorship of even the Word of God itself, where the truth has been hidden. That's what we're trying to do in this channel, is uncover the truth that has been hidden for so long. Majority of Bibles, I'd say 90% and greater, come from the Masoretic text, and the vast minority actually are from the Septuagint. Unless the Bible is explicitly called the Septuagint, or Brenton Septuagint, or other English translations of the Septuagint, it does not come from the Septuagint. So thank you very much for your time. Once again, I pray Yah bless you all and make way prosperous. Until next time, this is the Septuagint versus the Masoretic.